welcome to The World is Our Cloister, the monthly podcast of the Irish Dominican Friars, where we let you glimpse our life in the cloister and also take a look at the world through a Dominican lens. My name is Brother Chris Galt, and I'm joined today by Brother Bruno Kelleher.
Nice to be here.
And Fr Colm Mannion.
Thank you.
Fr Colm is the promoter of vocations for the Irish province of Dominicans, and that's very fitting because today we are discussing the subject of vocations. What does that mean? What are the signs of it? Why are there so many vocations to the order in Ireland? That is the crucial question that we want to get to, Fr Colm, but you're going to have to wait until the end of that episode. So I suppose when we talk about vocations, what you always hear again and again and again is a vocation is a call from God. And it's been said so many times, at least to my ears, from a number of years, thinking about a vocation and thinking about entering, that you keep thinking, okay, well, if it's a call from God, why doesn't he make it easier? Please answer that.
Well, God is simple. We're the ones who are complicated.
Oh, I like that. I like that very much. We're like overcomplicating it an awful lot is the kind of thing I get to. And it's important to remember, I think, that it has come from God. Like, that it doesn't come from us. It's not from the ground up, you know?
Yeah, I suppose for a lot of younger people now, there's so many options in life, so many choices, and sometimes people have a real desire to do God's will and to do the right thing, and yet they're just not sure where exactly to go or how to go about it, and really it takes prayer and time, you know, that we have to be patient, and at the same time we have to be proactive as well, you know. So discerning God's will. On the one hand, you know, there's a temptation to sit back and say, well, if God wants me to join a Dominican or if he wants me to do whatever, he'll make it clear, and you just sit back and wait. But at the same time, we have to take steps as well to allow the Holy Spirit to guide us and to see where we might be called. So we can't just sit back and do nothing and wait for God to intervene. And at the same time, we have to be patient as well, that God calls us in his time and on his terms, and we can't force things to happen either. So it's trying to find that balance where we're proactively discerning God's will and taking steps in a very real and concrete way, and at the same time having the patience and humility to allow God to speak to us in his terms. And
definitely come back to those steps in a wee bit, Brother Bruno.
Yeah, I was just, when you mentioned that phrase that everyone knows that vocation is a call from God, it's true, and thing when it gets overused becomes a bit trite, but we need to break that. That's
true though.
No, it's no less. Exactly, that's exactly the point, and we need to look maybe a bit closely at what is being said there. So when we hear like a call from God, well, that means it's a call from a person. It's not just some sort of like message being beamed out from an antenna or
divine
something,
robot or something.
Yeah, exactly. So if it's a person, we need to encounter that person if we're going to hear this call. And so there is, as Father is saying, where are you going to encounter this person who is calling you? If you never take any proactive steps to be where Christ is, and where we encounter Christ is in his church, in prayer, in the sacraments. So if you're not sort of actively seeking out to encounter him, well, I don't know how you will hear this call. It's you know.
Yeah, you have to take steps, and you have to, I mean, I suppose people feel somewhat vulnerable when you're putting yourself forward for a vocation or trying it, or you're testing the water and you don't know where you feel called. Sometimes people feel a bit intimidated by that, and they're afraid of failure, afraid of trying something and it doesn't work out, or maybe asking questions, and you know, because there is a certain vulnerability when we put ourselves forward and trying to see where the Lord might be calling us, and you know, as I said, the worst thing is to stand back and do nothing. But we do have to take those steps, vulnerable though we may be, but the Lord will never disappoint. You know, every once we're genuinely discerning God's will, we can't lose. You know, and we've nothing to be afraid of. That if we're genuinely trying to do the Lord's will, we shouldn't be afraid to knock on whatever door it may be, and to see if it's where we're called or not.
That standing kind of in a void or in a vacuum resonates with me, because it's what I did for so long. You know, like for a number of years, I was sat back and just thinking, oh well, you know, God will show me in his own time. And then it started to get frustrating because I thought, well, God's not showing me in his own time, or at least he's not showing me in my time. And then you hear, okay, we've got to be patient, whatever else, but I've been patient for so long, and kicking on a bit now. So, but you just got to get moving.
I think there is progression. It is progressive. Initially there is. Well, it is with yourself, maybe making that time for personal prayer, making that time to maybe be a bit more attentive about attending the sacraments, maybe daily mass or whatever it is, and that's the beginning. But at a certain point, I agree, you have to go a bit further and push outside of yourself. Certainly from my instance, it had to get out of my own head at a certain point, and speak to someone else. Like God doesn't just speak to us sort of in this completely interior way. He does speak to us through others, and we need to hear the voice of God speaking through others, which means eventually, engaging them on the topic.
Yeah, opening yourself up to what you were talking about there, Father, with the vulnerability.
Yeah, because people are afraid of what their friends might think, what their family will think. Yeah. Even people within the church, what they might think. It does take a certain amount of risk in it. And
when I was a seminarian, so for those who don't know, before I was in the order, I was a seminarian for the Diocese of Down and Connor for 2 years, which was a very great and fruitful time. But I had just come to the decision that though I was called to be a priest, I didn't feel it was the parish priesthood. So there was a certain level of secrecy over my pondering to come into the order, and I came on livings, but not on the kind of the public livings and so on. But that was a bit of an advantage because I was maybe spared some of the public vulnerability. The first word that came to mind there was shaming when I said public, like the public shaming of this man is considering a vocation, like let's put him into the public arena and call him names.
Yeah, and then people are afraid that if, for example, they go on a discernment weekend with the Dominicans, they're always going to be branded as the guy who wanted to be a Dominican and didn't go through or something. And people have this fear of trying that if it doesn't work out, well, they've kind of nailed their colours to the mast. But you have to, when you're discerning, I mean, it's about testing the water and trying to see where you feel called and trying to discern that. I mean,
and that implies going on a weekend. Firstly, you're not signing your life away. Yeah. When you're not like, okay, you're in now, that's it, you've come on a weekend, there's no going back. You're there, like you say, Father, to test the waters. But if you test those waters, which again implies something active that you are doing as well as God, and the test concludes that you're not called to be a Dominican or to be a priest or to be a friar, whatever, that's not a negative.
No.
It's not a failure on your part.
Yeah.
It's actually just, as you said, Brother Bruno, another positive step to the answer.
Right, and I have known fellas who even went even further and spent some time in a seminary, and at that point they heard that they discerned, we might say, that they weren't being called to priesthood. Does that mean it was a mistake that they were never called to the seminary? Not at all. They grew, they developed, they grew closer to Christ, and God wanted them there for that period. So there is, as we started saying here, there is progressive, and I do hear. I'm just conscious. We mentioned that the shaming, the fear. I think there's something in that, in the sense of like God will never cause us to act out of fear, and we would never be if you're moving towards something out of fear, then I would be very skeptical that that's from God. Sure. And so we shouldn't allow fear to be guiding the decisions we're making around vocations. God will act in our lives from a place that brings peace, because he ultimately desires our happiness. And if he's leading you to the priesthood, it's not because he needs you to do something. I need priests and I need priests to be saying mass and all these sort of things. It's because he thinks that's what will make you happy. Yeah. And so it'll come with a place of peace and contentment. That doesn't mean it won't come with difficulty or some concerns, but fear would be sort of a red flag for me, I think.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That God's will for our lives, God's plan for our lives, is going to be in conflict to what will make us happy. And I think sometimes we have this notion that maybe I need to try something because God wants me to do it, but I don't really feel I'd be happy doing it. I mean, that's that's the recipe for disaster. But when you do find where the Lord is calling you to be, wherever that may be, you will find a peace and a joy and a contentment that you wouldn't find anywhere else. So that's why I say that there's nothing to lose by taking those steps and to see.
I can certainly identify with that, the kind of sense of peace, and even at the same time, there might be, like you say, Bruno, the kind of storms and the tempests on the surface, but underneath that there is this sense of abiding peace. But I think it's important to emphasize as well that just that there's a difference here in the vocations that we're talking about as well. So in order to make a distinction, say, between the vocation to the priesthood and the vocation to the religious life, I think that's an important distinction to make. We've talked on the podcast before about what religious life is and giving the whole life over to God in the vows. What might be some of the signs that someone is called to do that, do you think? To give their life to God in the vows completely, say in an order, say in a religious order. Are there kind of signs that would be that's a truth or a reality?
Sure, yeah. Well, I guess for a lot of people, myself included, growing up, all you know is the local priest, the parish priest, and really it wasn't until I moved to Dublin, as a young man, and began living in Dublin, and you come encounter with different religious orders, and it was a whole other world that opened up. I mean, my only understanding was the priest in the local parish, and there was a part of me that admired that and still do, but yet I didn't feel called to it, and the idea of becoming being a priest in a parish, while on one level it seems attractive, it was something I personally I just didn't feel called to do. When I became aware of different religious orders, the different charisms, the different works that religious communities are involved in, the different forms of prayer, the spirituality that each order brings, it's something, it's wonderful to see that and to look into that and to kind of think, well, where do I think I would flourish? What order do I think I would be part of?
That's a key word, right? So flourishing, because I think sometimes I've encountered, and maybe I was guilty of it myself as well in the past, like considering my vocation, right, to be whatever will be hardest for me, and sometimes you come across this idea that that can't be my vocation. I might be happy doing it, like I might actually be happy in the priestly life or religious life. So I better, go and be unhappy. That's what God wants. That's what holiness is, But of course, it's
no. I think Father, you have to find what resonates. Would be another word that I often use. It resonates with you. I know we often use the expression like a vocation to religious life in a general way, but to be truthful or to be precise, no one has a vocation to religious life in a general way. You have a vocation to an order, to a religious community. And so each of those orders have a particular charism, a particular focus of the Christian life that they exemplify in the church. In a way, they almost sacramentalize it. All priests now preach, but the Dominican order is the order of preachers. In a way, we draw a particular focus and a particular attention to that aspect of the church's life. And so you will find, if you have a vocation, it will be to a particular charism, a particular focus that you will find resonates with you, gives you life, as you're saying, causes you to flourish. It's not to find the one that, like, all right, let's hunt down the one that's got the most extreme fast and the most extreme prayer. I sometimes think that temptation creeps in with the sort of Exodus 90 mentality. Let's just find what's most grueling. No, it's what's going to bring you the most joy.
Where are you going to flourish, like you said, Father?
And a big part of that is to, again, what we're saying, to go out and to meet these orders wherever it may be, wherever you may feel called, because you have to meet the people who are living the life and to see, it's one thing looking at the spirituality or the history of an order and reading it in a book but when you actually meet the people living the life, you get a sense, well, do I feel I belong here? Is this somewhere I feel a community I could be part of? And so it's one thing to read up on these things, but you do actually have to go out and meet the people as well.
And also remembering all this, like, trust the Lord. Which religious orders has He put in your path through life? Who have you encountered? And lead yourself to ask, well, why did I meet a Dominican priest on that pilgrimage, or why did I meet a Franciscan in Rome when I was in Rome, whatever it might be. I think trust in the Lord. He knows what He's doing.
At the same time, I'm never a big one for little kind of signs, because they're not essential. I hear an awful lot, like, again, I remember when I was thinking about ending the order, and someone advised me to pray to Saint Therese for a white rose, right? And I thought, bingo, this is it. All I have to do, say we novena to Saint Therese, white rose will land in my lap, 100%, you're landed. It didn't happen, right? Yes. But and I kind of was dismayed initially because I thought, well, such and such told me that would happen, and the other fella, like, he entered because he got a white rose from Saint Therese, and so I'm not denying that Saint Therese sent that man a white rose to show him his vocation or to encourage him. It just didn't happen that way for me. God has not bound himself to give us these little signs. So while there are definitely signs of vocations, I think there's a danger as well of like reading too much into, well, why did Father so and so say this or that, or and like almost divining the answer, because I don't think it's an overly complicated puzzle.
No, and you can't be waiting for perfection either. There is a certain amount of stepping out in faith. I mean, faith by its very definition means that there's something unknown there that we're trusting, that we're calling out to God, and we're willing to take that step in faith.
In that vein, Father, do you think it's like say legitimate or whatever for a person to enter a novitiate, right, to go that far without being certain that it's their calling or their vocation?
Well, it's hard to weigh up what exactly you mean by certain, because sometimes people mightn't have 100% assurance, but they might be willing to give it a go. I think you need a certain amount of seriousness about it, a willingness to try it.
You're not just there for it.
Exactly, so, I mean, it is quite a radical step to enter the novitiate and to formally begin the formation, but it's not, as you said earlier, Brother Chris, it's not a lifelong commitment at that point either.
No.
So it's a big step. It's serious, and there's a certain amount of commitment necessary. But at the same time, you can't wait till you have 100% commitment either, or 100% certainty. You have to take that step and try it. So I think if anyone's feeling any way called to trying it, well, why not? I think that's enough. That if you have that sense that maybe this is something that the Lord is calling you to, well, you've nothing to lose by trying it.
Yeah, sure. You're right in that. There's a certain level of commitment, because people have jobs and people, they have circumstances in their life that they're maybe not ideal, but there is definitely a sense as well that going so far as entry, or maybe the step before that, whatever that might be, again, it's about taking action, because I think God rewards the generosity. So for some people, they might get to a stage where they think the only way I'm going to actually get forward here is by moving, and maybe an entry into the novitiate is what was needed to make it clear. Sure. Either way, it is, that this is definitely from God, or in actual fact it's not. I don't think, again, I don't think we can be afraid to make mistakes. I actually say this an awful lot to people, but I don't think God is on a cloud somewhere waiting for us to trip up. I don't think he's up there, like popcorn in hand, like watching us, like, oh, what's he gonna do now? Oh, he's taking the wrong step. I wonder how this finishes. God knows actually where you're gonna end up, because like providence. So he's on our side.
And even if we do take a wrong step, this is the beauty of our faith, is that God will turn, even our mistakes can be turned around to a greater good.
Of course, if you have gone forward in generosity, thinking to yourself and praying to God, Lord, I'm not 100% sure. I don't know really what I'm called to do, but I'm taking this step for you, right? He's not going to laugh at you. He's
like somewhat very related. I see the issue if we're trying to stand back and figure it all out ahead of time, looking for this like definitive certainty. I think that's the wrong approach, and I agree with you, Brother Chris, that sometimes it's like looking for the extraordinary in every little incident that happened would be trying to read too much maybe into that meeting with that Dominican priest on pilgrimage in Rome or something. I wouldn't want to be reading too much into it. But I also was sort of pushing back against this idea of like, well, if I just get organized and get all the vocation literature of all the different orders and do my investigation into each one, I'll figure it out on my own, which one and where it is. And maybe sometimes not trusting, that was a sort of like not trusting promise. Yes, it requires a certain amount of application of our reason and our thinking, but also it's not something you can sort of a puzzle to be solved.
I don't think God has set us a puzzle and he just like watches us fail at it, you know. And at the same time, brothers, there are undeniably signs of a vocation. You know, I can relate to that in my own life. Firstly, I came to the belief that in every church in Belfast there was a wee old lady with a rosary who told me she was just there to tell me that I had a vocation. You know? That was maybe her full-time position, was employed by the church to tell any young man who walked in and looked anyway prayerful, like, you'd be a good priest, you know. But actually, when you talk to other young men who frequent churches, that doesn't happen to them. You know, so there is a reason why I was told repeatedly by little old ladies with rosaries, you know, you'd make a great priest, son, if you know.
And I do think it's important for young people that are out there to get involved in the church in some way that they can, you know, in some kind of ministry, be it a prayer group or whatever it is, but to try and get involved with the life of the church in some way. And by doing so, you build up a community. You get to know other people of, you know, shared values, people of faith, and that's very important. That people, especially young people nowadays, they need support within the church, and the prayers of people. That's all very important. But I think by getting involved in some way with the church, as I said, be it a prayer meeting or an active group. For me, it was Legion of Mary. You all had your own experiences, but to be involved in something, U2000, Pure in Heart, whatever it may be, that these groups help us to become involved in the church, and in a way that helps us to see maybe where we could give of ourselves, you know, in service, really. So I guess what the point I'm trying to make here is that the priesthood is a life of service, and that begins really by our baptismal call. We're all called to play some part in the mission of the church, and even as a lay person, as a young person out there, they can get involved in some way, and all of that will help them then to see where the Lord is calling. So again, it goes back to what we're saying, that you have to take some steps, some practical, concrete steps to do something. Don't just sit back and wait. You have to get involved, put yourself out there, and try something and see where it goes.
Yes, I also think a very common sign is that it won't go away. I very much think of the call of Samuel in the Old Testament. You know,
here I am, Lord.
He's to come back. It doesn't go away. He answers generously each time. And perhaps maybe you'll be that, and you'll answer generously the first time, and what you'll discover is after the living weekend or something that no, you're not being called. But frequently, I think the case be it just won't go away, and it'll keep coming back to you, this thought of priesthood, of religious life, Dominican life. I think that can be an indicator that you need to make the next step.
No two vocation stories are exactly the same, but there are common features in a lot of them. And I do think, and I suppose I'm talking more about the vocation to the priesthood here. I think there's definitely, there's going to be some sort of attraction to the things of the priest, whether it be in the mass or, and I think it's legitimate to say that, you know, even things like vestments and these things which are proper to the priest, if you have an interest in these things and you find yourself like, why did I just watch a 3-hour long mass on YouTube? Or like, why do I find these things, you know, that they really interest me when a lot of my friends are not interested in them? That could be a sign as well, you know, that you know, God is trying to tell you through your interests and your what attracts you about these things.
Certainly, I think the mass, the sacraments, that's crucial. I was fortunate that when I was 24 years of age, I was working in a job that allowed me to go to Mass every day. I remember I was 24, and for Lent, I said I'd go to Mass every day for Lent. It was a church near where I worked at the time. And when Lent finished, I kept that promise to go to Mass every day. And it was, you know, just a wonderful source of grace and blessing. I just knew it, having taken that step to go to Mass. And then I guess when I was discerning a call to the priesthood, one of the signs for me was just a love for the Mass and just the thought that, well, if the Mass is the highlight of my day every day, the most important thing I do every day, well, as a priest, that becomes the center.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
And
you get to actually celebrate Mass every
yeah.
day. You get to offer the Mass every day.
Yeah, yeah.
That for me was, because plenty of lay people, I hope, have a genuine love for the Mass, and they want to be there and receive Holy Communion every day, and they want to participate. For me, I had some kind of longing to be there, like not to be like, not like, oh, look at me, front and center kind of guy at the Mass, but I wanted to be doing what the priest is doing. And I remember that even when I was young, a teenager and even younger. The earliest recorded instance of any manifestation of vocation, according to my mother, is I think when I was 5. I voiced this kind of desire to be on the altar or whatever else, and
that's a sure sign. If you played saying Mass when you were a kid,
yeah. I never went that far, in fairness, and I also was never an altar server.
All right,
fun fact. Yeah, we have to include a fun fact in every podcast. So
okay.
Patrick Grant looks very serious and unimpressed by my fun fact, but there you go. You finished your cheese and onion roll anyway, have you? He was eating his lunch as we came in here. That's okay.
Yeah, I have to say, like, the Mass is so central to the identity of the priest. Like, if your identity as a priest is not centered on the Mass, I think there'll be an issue there.
Yeah.
And for me,
first thing he does, it's the first duty he has, is to offer the Mass for the people. God.
And then obviously very closely related to all the other sacraments.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, I was the unity of the Mass and the confession. And the thinking I had on it was how meaningful this was, how very meaningful, which especially came out actually after I lived for a year in New Zealand, where when I was traveling around, I discovered that Mass was not as readily to be had as I was accustomed to when I was growing up in Ireland. And it made me realize, maybe more profoundly, how significant the Mass was and how valuable it was, and then what a treasure it would be to be able to offer this for people. And certainly that has come out even more when you hear the cases of priests in the mission territories or something who are saying Mass for people who could not otherwise get it. And this is probably becoming more of a reality for so many people in Ireland now, that it's maybe not as easy as it once was, which maybe just not a good thing in and of itself, does make us realize how valuable the Mass is and how meaningful that would make a life as a priest, that you could offer that. What greater thing could you do for others? Because it's not really your act, it's the act of Christ. And I think that really was a powerful draw for me towards the priesthood.
Yeah, it's a bit mind-blowing actually. As someone who's preparing and imminently on the cusp of the priesthood, it's a little bit scary, but reassured by the fact it's not my act.
Remember,
it's the act of God.
Read the red, read the black.
Yeah, that's all I have to do. Definitely, I think if a man is called to the priesthood, there will have been some kind of attraction. Do we think that is the same for men and women thinking about religious life? Do you think there should be some kind of draw or attraction into the life of whether it be a cloister, or should they be attracted by the habit, or are there clues in that regard? Because I know what St. Thomas says, and it might be a little bit controversial nowadays. St. Thomas seems to say that the only thing you need to enter religion, right, the vowed life, is good intention. Right? Okay. You don't need a lot of these kind of exterior signs, he thinks, because as the church has always taught, it's the highest form of life. Not that the participants are necessarily the holiest people in the church, but it is the most perfect resemblance, objectively, to Christ's life and the apostles, the life of the apostles.
I think in terms of like a strict need, Thomas is correct on that. Like it is what is most fundamentally needed. If you've got the other thing, if you have an attraction towards, I don't know, singing the office or
wearing a habit
or wearing the habit or something, without that intention, then you don't really have a vocation. No. But that's not to say that accompanying that intention can be this draw towards choirs, singing the office in choir or doing certain kinds of working with the sick or whatever it is, or education. In fact, those would probably be the indicators as to which order or charism you're particularly being drawn towards. Sure. So I think they can be signs or helps towards discernment, but in and of themselves, they wouldn't be sufficient.
At the same time, I do think, okay, so on the one hand, I'm saying that St. Thomas says that's not necessary, because he thinks, he often reasons, trying to be very, very clear, okay, if this is the most perfect imitation of Christ objectively, then what he seems to say is people should be ruling that out first, right? Explore it first. If it's not for you, explore other vocations. In that regard, he seems to say that none of the attractions, again, for religious life are necessary. But that's not to say that they're not present. Yeah. They were present in my case. Yeah. And one of them was actually the habit of the order. And I think that's legitimate, As Brother Bruno says, it's not enough to say, I like the habit. Because actually, if that's all you have, you'll last about 2 weeks. And then you'll realise...
While you try keeping the thing clean.
Yeah, true. It's the most common question asked about the habit, how do you keep it clean? But I think the Lord can work through those little attractions, which again, not absolutely essential that they be there, but they often are, because he's super abundant, surely, in his generosity to us, in giving us these signs.
I'd agree with that. And what might be a little sign like that, or something you find attractive, mightn't be the same for everyone, but little things that are they just resonate with us. To go back to your word, Brother Bruno, something just clicks with us, or just seems to draw, or just something that attracts us. And we can't always explain the things that attract us. Some people, why does a certain piece of music attract other people and not someone else? We can't work out what draws our attention, the things that we're interested in. We can't always rationalize that there's something deeper at work within us that's moving us. And when it comes to religious life, there might be little things like that, like the habit, or maybe the idea of praying the office in common, but whatever it may be. And these can move us in ways that we don't always understand, but yet they're drawing us. And then there are the more fundamental parts of what we spoke about, priesthood, the Mass, the sacraments, and so forth. But I think it's all necessary, because going back to what we were saying, that a vocation is a personal calling, and it's the person of Christ. He's calling us, and he calls us in a unique and individual way, and that resonates with us on a deep and personal level, and it's something very complete and full about following the Lord in a way where we know we're on the right path, and it brings everything together, all the things that attract us, are everything we desire. Now, of course, religious life has its ups and downs, but sure, there is that sense of fulfillment and completeness, and that everything is on the way to being made whole, even if we're not perfect in this life, but there is that sense that all our attractions and all our desires are somehow on the way to being fulfilled and completed.
And St. Thomas does define religious life as a school for tending to perfection. It's a place you enter where God can perfect you. You're not perfecting yourself. That's a heresy. Okay, but you're entering an area, you're entering an environment wherein there are structures that God works through, not because he has to, but because he's chosen to, where he will make you more perfect, and that means more like Christ. But when you're saying, Father, about it is a personal call, that means there has to be a development of the relationship with that person. It goes back to what you're saying about getting involved in the life of the church, the sacraments and worship, prayer groups, and these kinds of things. Service that you mentioned too, about growing in virtue, kindness, and generosity. I think these things make this growth, that process, will make you more apt to hear a vocation if it's there. Surely. Or to read the signs, using that language very carefully, but to be able to spot these things.
Again, it goes back to the balance between the interior life and the exterior life, that we're both spiritual beings, and also we're physical, we're practical as well, and I think sometimes when we talk about discernment, we put an overemphasis on the interior, that it's all about God speaking to you personally within the depth of your soul, and of course that's very important. The life of prayer is crucial, but it has to be complemented as well with what we do and how we live our lives. That is forming us as well, that's helping us to navigate the world, by our interactions with people and the things we get involved in and how we spend our time. And we have to pay attention to both the interior life of prayer, what goes on in silence, and our own personal friendship with the Lord, but also how our faith is expressing itself in the world around us, and how we're living our faith, and we can't separate those. It can't just be about what goes on in the silence of your heart. It has to be something lived as well, and we need both. And I just think maybe at times when we talk about vocation, we kind of miss that part of it as well. That you have to be actively involved in your faith, and your faith has to be manifesting itself in how you live your life, and that's where you begin to discern.
Sure, you're not facing this question in a vacuum.
Yeah,
you're not. There has to be some kind of engagement, like you're saying.
I think, as we said earlier, that Christ decided the way he ordained for his continued action through history was through the church. He works through his church, which is a concrete reality and concrete people and concrete things. He didn't just decide that he would reach people through the interior, although he can, but he also, because of who we are, and he realizes that we need to hear words spoken by a human voice, to see things done by human hands and things, and to see the witness of others. I think that's a very big part, a very important part of any vocation, is to look at the witness of others. Yes, no two vocation stories are alike, but we learn a lot from those who've walked the way ahead of us. And so the surest guide to any vocation, anyone who's discerning a vocation, is at some point you're going to have to speak to a priest or another religious who has walked that road ahead of you, and that's the wise figure who will help guide you. Their story won't be identical, but you need to hear it from them and see it from them.
The benefit as well of the fact that Christ speaks to us through his church. Okay, there's no infallible church teaching that I must enter a religious order, but if you do go so far as to speak to a promoter of vocations. We were discussing before, Fr Colm, what is your actual title? It's the promoter of vocations, right? When people say like vocations director, it's almost like you go around directing people to enter here, there, just picking them out of a crowd, you'll be a priest, okay? But speaking to a promoter of vocations, putting yourself at the mercy of a council who will decide whether or not to admit you to the order, entering a novitiate, the next step, and putting yourself before a group of senior brothers or sisters who know what a vocation looks like, so they're able to look at you and your way of life. This is a great benefit. You're actually not on your own. If you go that far, if you try to discern in a vacuum, if you try to lock yourself away in like exterior silence and just figure it out from within, you're depriving yourself of this really useful and God-ordained tool, and such that if you get to that stage and this council of seniors and wise brothers and sisters say to you, we actually don't think you have a vocation, a good positive step for you. You might be disappointed, but they're probably right. I mean, Dominicans have been in Ireland 800 years now, so there's a wisdom that comes with the tradition and the the wisdom passed down through generations of Dominicans, people who have walked the walk and lived the life, and they can help people to discern. So you're right. It's not something an individual has to work out by themselves, but there's plenty of support and help out there within the church, and why not get in contact with a promoter of vocations? I still default to like a vocations director. When I tell people about you and what you do, it's like, he's the vocations director, he just directs all our vocations. Okay, so we have been in Ireland for 800 years, and we have survived somehow for that length of time, despite penal laws and all kinds of persecutions, and we have to admit, like, sometimes the order itself may be going wrong. Why in this time, Father Promoter of Vocations, why are men entering this order?
Yeah, good question. Well, I've been thinking a lot about recently we had the Master of the Order visited Dublin to celebrate Mass, beginning the celebrations for the 800 years of Dominicans in Ireland. And I've been thinking a lot about what he said when he was talking about something that's classical how it's timeless and timely. It's when you think of the Dominican charism, how it's timeless. It's not confined to time, and yet it's timely. It seems to really connect with the times we're living in.
Right. Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, it's something I've noticed with a lot of young men who are getting in contact and maybe discerning the Dominican way of life. They have a great desire to learn more about their faith and then to go out and to evangelize, to go out and to preach. And the Dominican charism, it's timeless, but it's also timely. And I think when we look at Ireland at the moment and the church in Ireland, there's a real hunger for people to learn more about their faith. People have this desire, and people want to know God. And very often we know we can get discouraged and disheartened by the amount of people leaving the church in Ireland and what has happened over the last 20, 30 years, 50 years, whatever. But I do think it's hopeful to recognise that a lot of people in Ireland have drifted from the church, not because they rejected it, but simply because they didn't know it to begin with. Yeah. And by simply going out there and talking to people about our faith and what we know to be true and what has been passed down to us, the teachings of the church, the traditions, so forth, to go out and to communicate that to people, people are just hungry for it. There's a desire out there, and I think this is why our order it's both timeless and timely. That the Dominican charism to pray in community, to study the faith, and to go out and to preach it. Yeah, it's something that really connects with where we're at in the church in Ireland at the moment, and I think that's a big part of why we're blessed with vocations in recent years, because the young men who are coming through have this desire to learn more about their faith and then to go out and to preach.
And that desire has been implanted by God.
I would say I've two thoughts on why particularly. One's maybe more practical and one's a bit more in harmony with what Father was saying. And again, it's to go back to that thing that we spoke at the very beginning. What is a vocation? It's a call from God. So it's God who's deciding that he needs Dominicans now. Yes. I think that's a big part. If you look at the history of the church, God raises up different religious entities as he needs them for particular moments in history. When there was new worlds discovered, when where the faith needed to be preached, he raised up the great missionary orders. When education was obliterated by the French Revolution, he raised up the great teaching orders. So it's in response to a particular need in the church. I think that the Dominicans here in Ireland, but even globally, are seeing good numbers in vocations. So in asking myself, why is that? Well, I think you look at the motto of the order, it's veritas, truth. And in a world in which truth has become meaningless, it's no one believes in truth anymore. There is no truth. There's your truth, my truth, which is to say there is no truth. But you can't hide what's true, and the desire for it. There's absolute desire. People long for the truth. And so in response to that need, that burning need to hear the truth about man, about who he is, about what he's called to, about God's vision for humanity and his promise through his son of what and the fulfillment of that. People need to hear that, and they're longing to hear that, whether they sort of fully know that or not. Yeah. And so I think on that end, God needs the Dominicans right now, and that's why fundamentally he is calling men to this vocation. Yeah. On a more practical level, I sometimes joke,
practical brother,
vocations make vocations. It helps immensely to come on a live-in and see other brothers of a similar generation, similar age to yourself, knowing, because religious life is about community, living in community, certainly in Dominican life anyway. And it'd be very hard to live that community if there was no one of a similar generation to you, or you're looking forward I'm going to be on my own in a few years. I'm deeply grateful that I live in a house with two men in their 90s who hand on to me in a huge way, in a very tangible way, the lived tradition of the Dominican order. But I'm also exceedingly grateful that I'm in formation with currently 16 other young Dominicans. It helps immensely. So there's a sort of a more practical level. It greatly aids when you can look around and see others.
And those two are not mutually exclusive.
No,
so God can work through in fact does definitely work through the more practical level of things. Brothers, I think that might be a good place to maybe wrap it up. I think we should say that, on that note of the fact that it's the Lord calling me, it's the Lord drawing men into the order and into the priesthood in general, and into the religious life in general. But since we're talking about the Dominican order particularly, I think I would like to say that if anyone's listening, any young men listening, indeed young women to other religious institutes, whether it be the sisters or the nuns, if you do find yourself having thoughts about vocation and wondering about, am I called to be a Dominican, am I called to be a priest, I would like to say there's a good chance that you are, if the thoughts are there. If the thoughts are on your mind and you find yourself praying about it, wondering about it, I could only encourage men and women to come forward, and just like you said earlier on, Father, to take action. So before we wrap up, maybe, Father, how do people do that? What's the best way to get in touch with you, say, as the promoter of vocations?
Sure, yeah. Well, again, if I could just echo your words of encouragement to people, if anyone's listening, no matter what stage they're at, even if they're just loosely curious about the idea, or maybe they feel seriously called, just get in contact. And I regularly put on weekends for young men to come and experience, a weekend in our communities. And on average, I do one of those weekends every month. So get in contact and come along. And I've seen, I'm doing this job 6 years now, so I've seen many people come and experience these weekends. Sometimes people come in and they get a sense, yep, I totally belong here. When can I sign up? Some people come in and say, well, it's not for me, but I'm glad I came. Exactly, most people, it's somewhere in between, that there's parts of the life that they experience and that's new and perhaps they didn't expect, and other parts that they weren't so sure about. But the important thing is to try it. And of all the people who have come on these weekends, I've never had anyone not enjoy it or didn't get something out of it.
Or regretted it or something.
Yeah. In fact, nobody's ever even left before the weekend was over, which is remarkable when you think of it. Nobody regrets it. And that's not to say, of course, that everyone who comes on a weekend will go ahead and enter. Only a small percentage do. Yeah. But yet, it nobody regrets it. So please get in contact, and email or my mobile number. I can give them here, or do you post them up on? Or post it up. Yeah. Okay.
We'll post your email address and your mobile number maybe into the I don't know what you call that, Patrick. The description. I'm being told it's called the description. Okay. It's a very important thing for me to know.
Okay. All the social media stuff is over my head now, but I do know how to answer emails and answer a phone. So.
Those, by the way, are not prerequisites for joining the Dominican order. We will teach you how to answer emails and answer a phone if you, if you decide to. Brothers, I want to thank you both for joining us. It's been a great discussion on vocations, and I want to thank you as well for listening to this episode of The World is Our Cloister. Please don't forget to check out all our other content on our social media, including our Instagram, our YouTube channel. If you want to get in touch, generally, you can leave us a comment on the YouTube channel. You can enter the Q&A on the Spotify. I do know about these things. Or you can email the podcast generally at mediamanagerop@gmail.com. Got that right as well. We'll see you next time for the next episode of The World is Our Cloister. Thank you again, and God love you.